Welcome to episode 2 of the Manhattan Art Review TV. I'm Sean Tatol. This is Isaac Goes, filmmaker. Thanks for coming, Isaac.
Thanks for having me.
And so today we'll be talking about your new film, Worlds, which we'll have a link somewhere, I'm sure. But before we get into any of my questions, I thought maybe you could just kind of do a brief overview of what the film's like.
Worlds is a film I recently completed over the course of the last 4 years or so. Available to watch right now on Keynet Media, which is a site co-run by myself and Michelle Yoon. We program a lot of avant-garde cinema, new avant-garde cinema made by young filmmakers who we think are really pushing boundaries right now. Throughout the course of shooting, just kind of a back and forth, going back and forth between shooting the film, editing, shooting more, and then of course what you end up shooting, makes you change what you had originally edited. There's a lot of stuff where once I had completed filming, probably 3 years ago, it became apparent that everything needed to be reworked in light of all the new stuff I had shot.
Right. Yeah. The material influences the form, and then the form influences collecting more material,
Yes,
and then you have to change the entire form.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Use of music and sound in the film work that I've seen by you is very active within the structure of it, and just in terms of clearly having a background in experimental cinema, but then having a sort of modern influence that you could almost relate it to music videos, and how
Totally.
I don't know, it reminds me of when I first saw Godard in college or something,
Sure.
Learning how jump cuts we can't even register them because we grew up watching music videos. So that kind of sense of cutting isn't
It's
radical.
less jarring.
It's not jarring. It's not radical. We read it as normal because it's normalized. So there's something about the way that sound works with the kind of density of editing in your work that seems to interrelate in a way that reminds me of something like music videos. But what's very interesting to me is how fluid the relationship between the two is. But you don't make the music, and so I'm almost just how does it go together so well,
Sound work goes unnoticed in cinema, and a lot of my favorite filmmakers are sort of known for their achievements in sound work. I've already brought up Lucas and Coppola, but sound, I think, is a very underappreciated aspect of the form. I think any director will tell you that. And for this movie, the sort of sound work that we wanted to do, I was working primarily with James Emrick, who did the score, and who mixed the music, and then also mixed the music and the sound, and also Lila Perry, also known as \F. And basically, what I was going for, there's not a whole lot of examples I could turn to in the history of cinema. The sort of combination of diegetic sound and music sort of interwoven with the film and cutting in and out. It just doesn't really exist. I scoured a lot of stuff because I finished the film first without doing any sound. It was entirely silent.
Oh, wow.
But in my head, I had these cues. It's kind of hard to explain. When you're making a film like this, when you're watching it, you're very much can hear what's going on as you're watching it, even though it's silent. But then when I sat down to do the sound, I thought, okay, this is going to take me a month or so, which definitely was not the case. It takes much, much longer. So I sort of was scouring for examples of films that had made use of diegetic sound and score in the way the film does, and I found there wasn't really very much. So it really became a matter of building something new from scratch, and I think that just this fact that there wasn't a whole lot existing actually contributed to one of the most unique aspects of the film, because there's nothing to base it off of.
Right.
I feel that was maybe the most unique thing the film does. James and I began with like a score and a few different ideas. Maybe we'd have one score sort of weaving in and out of the film throughout its entirety. I think James made a bunch of variations on one theme. We're going to have one score. But then when I started editing, I sort of realized that we were going to need to switch it up a bit more than that. So the first music you hear in the film, that's the score we're going to use for the entire film. But then I realized, there needs to be more variance in what's going on. So what I ended up doing was James gave me his library of music, probably something like 200 to 300 songs.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Lila Perry as well gave me a library of, I don't know, probably 50 songs. And so what you're hearing in the movie is me sort of combing through this very large catalog of music, and just picking bits and pieces out and rearranging them and chopping them up. A lot of stuff was also done where I would, maybe take one or two notes from one of James's songs, arrange that, like, take a note, pitch it down, take another note, pitch it up, and then I would have James go back and remake this into a more smoother sounding song. And I feel like this is where the bulk of the music work really came in, was, I had this huge library of sound, which sort of a double-edged sword because I have so much to choose from, but it's also a bit overwhelming. And then sort of using what I had been given to make new music, and then having James, kind of remake that.
Right. So it was pretty collaborative, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth, especially the mixing. Took us quite some time because we sort of realized, okay, we had landed on our final mix maybe a month before we released the film, and then realized, most people are going to be watching this off of a laptop, not in a theater. And then we had to go through again and sort of listen, one, out of laptop speakers, out of just, Apple headphones and things like that. And I mean, I'm sure it doesn't matter to most people, but when you're that deeply into your own film, you're starting to hear all of these crazy changes that need to be made. So there's like a really long period of mixing for the film. Especially all of the diegetic sound is either things James recorded, things I recorded, things friends recorded while I was shooting, and a mix of things from sound libraries, all sort of stitched together.
Movie Stop by Jeff Price?
No, I don't think so.
I think it's actually the process is actually very similar.
Okay.
It's kind of like a film diary where he shot a lot of stuff from his life for a very long time, like a decade or something, and all of the sound work is done afterwards.
Sure.
A lot of it is kind of like mimicking what's actually happening in real life.
Sure.
And the construction of that is like kind of mind-boggling.
Okay, I'll have to look into that.
I think it's a rare occurrence of a
because I was looking everywhere just to, sometimes you get lost, what am I even doing, or like, is this good? You're so in your head that I was like, I need some sort of positive affirmation, and I could not find that,
someone you can compare yourself to.
Anywhere. One final thing I'd like to point out about sound is, within the tradition of like avant-garde cinema, sound is often sort of an afterthought. Right. You have so many works in the history of cinema where it's will be some like rapid fire 16mm film or something, maybe similar to mine, but just set to like an ambient track, or some very spastic electronic music track or something like that.
Or like Brackage doing silence, which is
Yes.
the honorable decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of that's kind of the thing is I think maybe the heritage of where you're coming from is a lot of people who were like so focused on film as like a material construct.
Totally.
They don't really have space in their head to deal with sound.
Totally,
so
and
it's
even
interesting to marry them.
Yeah, and even as I was working on the sound, I was having a lot of doubts. Like, maybe am I ruining my movie? Should I have left it a silent film?
Right.
But then as it came together, I realized, no, I've been constructing this thing, although silent, I've been constructing it with sound in mind this entire time.
Right. Yeah, because well, that's the thing is I think the dynamics of both the visual and the sound, I think, meld together really effectively.
I'm glad to hear that.
That's that's why I wrote it down as my first.
Yeah.
It was like very apparent from the very beginning that like the function of both is like very seamlessly combined.
Yeah.
And, like, since you're not a musician making it yourself, it's like almost shocking to see.
Yeah. And people point it out all the time, which
Yeah.
I think is really great, and it's something that's very rare.
Yeah.
To point, I mean, it's not even just the score. People specifically pointing out the sound work, which very, very rarely happens.
Speak of the more filmic aspects. Like regarding like your use of montage, I what seemed to me to be sort of a trend with the structure was that the parts that were more sort of like documentary and like filmic, like handheld camera work, were longer, and then the more digital parts were more compressed and shorter and like faster cutting, and sort of like often like I'd see like something like, oh, is that digital? But then like it would be gone before
It's
I even had a chance
too
to
fast to
look at it.
register.
So I was wondering if that was like how that came about, if that was like you had like concept behind it, or if it's just how it kind of came about through structuring it, or like the practicalities of making digital work, or what?
Well, it's kind of interesting, especially that you mentioned, the digital parts are shorter, which is something I guess I had not even personally thought about.
Yeah.
But in terms of practicality, it's actually very impractical, seeing as, the 16 millimeter, that's what costs money to shoot. My friend Isaiah Medina and I have a joke that, on the Bolex, when you press the record button and you hear the film rolling through, you're hearing yourself losing money, every second. And that's a lot of the film in the beginning stages. I'd be very scared to record for long periods of time. I'd be doing these very, very brief, Bolex shots to sort of save the film. Whereas digitally, you can shoot as long as you want. But that's actually kind of funny because, I think you're totally right that the digital images do last for much shorter periods of time than all of the 16 millimeter. As far as montage in general is concerned, my colleagues and I that's probably our main concern with filmmaking at this juncture is montage, primarily because it is extremely underexplored in the history of the form. And also it's the one aspect of filmmaking that is sort of without precedent. For instance, the narrative aspects of cinema have their precedent in theater and the novel. The image itself, you can look to painting and photography. But montage is sort of cinema's own. There's nothing else like it, to be found in any other art form. And what the great shame there is that it hasn't been explored all that much in this past 120 years or so. In the beginning, of course, you do have a lot of experimentation before we codified any rules or anything. You have Ziga Vertov and Eisenstein and Abel Gance. But somewhere around 1930 or so, you see everything become, very codified. And the way films are structured basically just repeat for the next, 100 years.
Yeah, people do it by rote.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a big shame because you can see, if you look back to this early period, there's so many different paths we could have taken, and we just took this one single path. Of course, it's montage isn't wholly absent in modern cinema. It's usually, you can find it in action movies or musicals, particularly in like fight scenes or something like that. But even in those cases, what's being covered is one very direct action, one very distinct idea. It's just sort of rapid cutting. So my ideas concerning montage are just, I don't know if I'm straying too far from your question, but the ideas that myself and a lot of, I think a few of my colleagues are trying to express is, one, we sort of gave up on what was the distinguishing, factor, the thing that distinguished cinema from all the other art forms. We sort of left in the dust and just followed this, this very deeply ingrained, this one structure, this one way of making films. And it's gotten to the point where, through repeat exposure or what have you, this way of structuring films, the sort of shot, reverse shot, just what you think of when you think of a normal movie, is seen as something that is necessary, when really it's a contingency. It's something maybe one movie did, a lot of credit gets given to like Birth of a Nation and things like this, that then everything sort of followed from here on out. But really, it's a totally contingent path that we've been following.
It's only a necessary method if you don't want to think about it.
Exactly. But it's very hard, I think, too, because people like you and me, or even someone who's 70 years old, our entire lifetime, this is the only thing we've known out of cinema. It's the only thing we've ever seen is this sort of movie. What me and my colleagues are sort of trying to do is use montage to convey sort of a wider breadth of ideas than are possible with the, this codified system we've developed. More complexity, I often talk about, we have these sort of multiple tiers of intercutting. Like normally in a movie, when there is intercutting, it's between kind of two scenes unfolding at the same time. But why can't we make that 6 things happening at once? I think we give ourselves a little bit too little credit as humans to be able to like decipher this much information. And I think we're able to convey much more complex sort of webs of ideas this way, where we have all these things going on at once, but they're all interrelated somehow, sometimes not, and these interactions, allow the viewer to experience, more difficult concepts or something that could not just be expressed through, our standard methods of montage. And I think this can be very alienating, because we're not used to it. Alienation isn't my, main objective with a work like this. I sort of want the images to almost flow over you because they're happening very, very quickly, and you're getting small glimpses of them. But alienation is not necessarily a totally unwanted side effect.
Difficulty can be good a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly, and especially conceptually with the film, this film is very much about bringing to the fore, the invisible elements of our cognition that account for the world we inhabit and things like this, things going on in the background. And these are things that if you were to, notice them all the time in everyday life, you would be alienated. You wouldn't be able to function, if we were to walk into this park and I'm consciously, noticing this leaf on this tree and all these leaves on this ledge, but that alienation can teach us a lot about what we're doing when we're, creating the world that we live in. So I guess I'd say my montage works in this sort of twofold sense of, there's this heightened complexity of ideas that I want to convey, and also there is a bit of alienation that also, is part of this concept.
Right. And so, I mean, I'm no technician. I don't know anything about filmmaking firsthand, but like, isn't this also, because that was kind of my follow-up to the initial question, is that like, it's like impractical to make the digital portions shorter, but but then the possibilities with editing and montage within digital versus actual film, doesn't like the density of what you're allowed to do with digital work, is that what led maybe to those portions being shorter? Like, and to go back to, you said talking about like 6 different layers going on at the same time, does digital editing technology have something to do with like those possibilities expanding compared to history?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the primary things that I'm very interested in with montage, is that our generation is sort of the first that has had sort of, I want to call it an inborn access to nonlinear editing systems. We've all have been familiar with iMovie since, I don't know, like 10 years old.
Right.
And a lot of this complexity in the montage, I think, would be basically impossible to do on a Steenbeck, like the old sort of editing machine. What you would have access to as an experimental filmmaker in any other era.
Yep.
So yeah, it's this marriage between film and digitality is very important, because the nonlinear editing system, none of this would be possible without it. And I think that contributes to a lot of my ideas in this regard, is the fact that I'm able to look at everything that I've shot, laid out in front of me, sort of decompartmentalized, as opposed to, maybe filmmakers in the past, you're very much looking at everything on a strip. It's more, it's a more linear mindset. It's not just, you're working on a linear machine. It factors into how you're thinking about it.
You're able to map the whole
Exactly. You can map out the whole film, and you can try things over and over again.
Going back to like kind of the filmic parts, like it's very clearly that the footage is like hanging out with your you went somewhere with your friends, or you like took a trip with your friends, and like the footage is just like culled from something that's very closely related to like your daily life.
Sure.
I mean, it's, you took a trip. It's not. It's not you like waking up in the morning or something. But it's clearly like very close to a sort of like personal. It's not quite diaristic in the way you use it, but the material is diaristic in the sense that it's like you hanging out. Larger question that interests me is this use of sort of like personal material towards an end that's clearly not like, confessional diaristic storytelling, like that sort of like disconnect or tension between the two modes of like personal versus like abstraction is it's interesting to me the way you kind of like tiptoe between the two.
Sure. Yeah. I think you yourself have put it in a really, basically the correct way to begin with. It's that, this diaristic material is not necessarily the subject matter of the film, it's the material for the film.
Right.
And when I was making the movie, I had it in my head that I'm making something of like a scientific work of cinema, where I have a hypothesis or thesis that I then need to go out into the world and put to the test. Naturally, given budgetary restrictions and things like this, I'm sort of married to what I have available to me, to what's at hand. But I've made a lot of very straightforward journalistic films in the past, or diaristic films, and with this picture, immediacy was not necessarily my main goal.
Yeah.
But in thinking of the subject matter, or my thesis in making this film, the concept behind it, where we're looking into how we build up the world around us, how we figure our own place in the larger social world we inhabit. Some degree of subjectivity in this is necessary.
Right.
So it's not.
Right.
I feel like it's not necessarily at odds with what I'm trying to do to include this sort of diaristic subject matter. And I also like to think of the example of, even in the hard scientists, or in the hard sciences, you have examples of scientists sort of having these like light bulb moments in their banal everyday lives. Like, because it's something I'd thought about a lot making the film, is I don't want this to come across as incredibly diaristic, though I know there are a lot of diaristic elements. But one of my favorite examples in the hard sciences is, Einstein. I don't have the specifics of this, but having some issue with some problem in Brownian motion. The correct idea comes to him someday. He's just looking at a glass of water, staring at particles swirling, in his cup of water. And I think, I don't know, it's just a little interesting anecdote that I think ties in this idea of scientific filmmaking with the mundane everyday life.
Right. Yeah. There's a couple layers with it where, like, one, you can't, like, it's a falsehood to sort of assume some sort of like grandiose sense of objectivity that like you can remove yourself from this. And then also that I think with the like Einstein anecdote, or like just these stories of like a scientist like having a dream that makes them have some breakthrough, that like the sciences present themselves as whatever more objective than the arts, but like they're no less creative.
Yeah, exactly.
And and so to try to like integrate those things is a pretty fruitful experiment.
Yeah. There are also a lot of things I think that aren't explicitly diaristic in the film, and to go back to something you mentioned earlier, material shaping the idea and back and forth, and even you mentioned my travels. That's something where I have the concept of the film. Initially, I don't know I'm going to be spending an extended period of time in France or wherever, and I go and I see castles and things like this, and I realize, okay, I readjust. I realize, okay, I can work this into the bigger picture of my film.
Right. And that's the thing with your like scientific approach, and like treating it as a that you have like a hypothesis rather than a plot.
Exactly.
And because it's a hypothesis, it's more of just like a working method that you then impose upon the world that you live in.
Yes.
And then
what happens happens. And
then you build it out.
We get the data back.
Yeah.
And we see where that takes us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So my kind of ribbing, not I don't mean it aggressively, but the whole notion of this not a binary, but the interrelation between your sort of using real life as aesthetic material for your work is pretty close to how a lot of people use Instagram, or used to use Instagram when people still use it. I feel like no one I know likes Instagram anymore. But there's this thing of like, that you kind of, people use Instagram as a way to sort of like filter an aesthetic presentation of their daily life in a way that's pretty closely related, I think, to the process that you're doing. I mean, obviously it's more complex, but I don't know, I guess I was wondering if you had any kind of thoughts on that relationship. I mean, it's could very well be coincidental. But.
No, totally. I actually don't see this as any sort of ribbing question at all. From the get, I was actually ready for this remark as I was making the film. I guess what I have to say about it is not necessarily that, my movie looks like Instagram, but Instagram looks like my movie. And I don't mean this in any sort of egomaniacal way. Obviously,
right.
Instagram predates my picture by a number of years. But this idea of, a lot of fleeting images culled from everyday life, organized into some sequence, has a long tradition in cinema, notably the avant-garde, which would be the tradition my films belong to. I think this is especially apparent. You have a lot of, very straightforward diaristic filmmakers like Jonas Mekas or Anne Charlotte Robertson, where I think their work kind of prefigures Instagram in a lot of ways, especially if you consider the notion of the in-camera edit, which has a very long history in the tradition of the avant-garde, where the structure of the film itself is accounted for by some impersonal mechanism. It's just images as they're coming to the filmmaker as they're making. It's sort of an anonymized mechanism. It's impersonal. It's the machine doing it for them, which I think you can see that in, like, if you look at my Instagram page, there's a structure to it. It's obviously not expressing some greater conceptual idea or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just
but it kind of accrues it through using it over time.
Exactly. It's happenstance is organizing all of these things into a sort of structure. Even like the earliest films by the Lumieres, that's I think very much similar to Instagram.
It's pretty close.
And just little snippets of everyday life. And you have other films like People on Sunday, things like that.
Something cool happens, so we turn the camera on.
Exactly. It's it's been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
I will say though, and you kind of touched upon this, but where my film differs is that I'm not turning over these diaristic elements to some sort of impersonal mechanism to organize it for me, it's like I said earlier, the diaristic or the everyday is not the subject of the film, it's just the material for the film. There's, I'm trying to think of a good example, maybe like Brackage's film Cat's Cradle, if you're familiar with it. It's a lot of shots, it looks like it was maybe made in one day, a lot of shots in his apartment. But it's organized in such a way that, this is expressing some greater conceptual idea. It's not just
formal structure.
It's not just, images of daily life, one after another. And I also think that Instagram is largely indicative of, this greater media landscape, or I guess this landscape of images we find ourselves in today, where you have sites or apps like TikTok and things like this. That require an enormous amount of, I guess you could call it visual literacy, to decipher this rapid fire information coming at you, that I think our generation maybe possesses a little. The younger generation is very much, much more media literate than we are. And I think if you're looking at my film, there's so much information coming at you so fast that I think the media landscape we find ourselves in is a very important, at least subconsciously for me, in making a film like this.
Totally.
Right? I don't feel the need to let things linger for super long for you to get the idea, because I feel like we were just constantly bombarded by images, all the time. And that's not something I dislike or have any gripes with. It's something it's just the way things are.
Yeah, well, it's almost like what we mentioned earlier about, the music videos and everything, is that like, it's like whatever slow cinema is kind of like a contradiction to this speed of life that we have, and like fast cinema is like
absolutely
normal, and like what TikTok imposes on us is this sort of like frenetic space that it then makes sense to sort of meet that on some level and
catch up.
Definitely. But this isn't like, I don't know about this as like a question. It's not really that obvious, but I can integrate it with another question that I didn't really bring up earlier, but that, like, you've mentioned like the sciences and everything.
Sure.
And like I think you're much more of a rationalist than I am.
Sure.
I'm kind of a diehard materialist.
Okay.
And so like just like the kind of, like, for instance, my kind of thought about montage, that, I'm obviously not a filmmaker or anything, but like what I've always thought of montage as being is a sort of like a pretext for thought and a pretext for engagement, and
Sure.
like that the structure of a montage is as a structure in and of itself secondary to just the filmmaker's ability to sort of like engage themselves with the work, and to not, it's like, because what you're talking about with the history of montage, that it's kind of this rote sort of like, conventional system that people don't think about. And I think that's what the power of montage is, or like to have an engagement with montage is a way to think, to avoid not thinking, and to avoid like going into autopilot with it. So I don't know, like I remember specifically actually when I first thought this was, I was watching the making of The Marriage of Maria Brown by Fassbinder, and they talked about a certain scene where, I think it's people walking through like a bunch of people like just got out of prison of war camps or something, and like people are looking for other people, and like they were talking about how the way they thought of constructing the scene was like, this group comes from this way and this group comes from that way, and like there's like a certain meaning to like the directions of these people, and my thought was kind of like, well, I don't understand any of that meaning, but I do think it's a very well constructed scene.
Yeah.
And like that the construction itself is the power that comes through, and that the reading perhaps is, or the imposition of the meaning that the director creates is secondary to just the effect that comes from them putting a lot of consideration into creating a scene.
Sure. That's rather than what I'm striving for would be, rather than any sort of secondary meaning or any sort of split between the two, would be both the montage and the content, or whatever the concept, whatever you want to call it, are informing and influencing each other.
Right.
That's something I've tried to be very conscious of with this film, or it's not just montage happening for montage's sake, which is something I think we see in a lot of, or in the few works of experimental cinema that do make use of rapid fire sort of montage. I don't necessarily see the connection to what is contained in the image.
Right.
And that's fine. That's just what I'm looking for is, a sort of interplay between the two. And like this Maria Braun example, I think from what you're describing, I haven't seen the behind the scenes or whatever it is you're talking about. But even that is so married to this sort of repetition of this very deeply ingrained, film structure that we've become so accustomed to,
Right.
to where it's like the meaning of the scene is basically given over to where do we separate from this standardized system? It's like, all right, here's where we break the rule, and here's and that's why it has meaning.
Right.
Whereas what I'm trying to do is basically disregard these rules in the first place.
Right.
And take it back to square one. Like I'm talking about in the 1920s, before we had this system, or even that, like late 1910s. There's so much more going on because no one's concerned with necessarily breaking a rule, and for the sake of the sake of expressivity or something like that. It's just there is no rule to break.
Right. And I think I think maybe what's going on with the Fassbinder example is an idea of sort of that maybe they are working within a sort of like conventionalized structure, but then they like impose a sort of arbitrary symbolism to like put some investment into a system that's formally maybe dead.
Yes. Yeah. Well, not dead yet. It's
not
still,
dead, or tired.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the efforts as well. I'm a great fan of Fassbinder. I don't mean to slight this work in any way.
No, totally.
That's a great picture as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great conventional filmmaker in some ways, you know. I guess, you've kind of you kind of alluded to it already, but I guess my last question is that the feeling I got from the work is that you're attempting to assemble something out of reality that didn't exist already, and I was wondering if you could define what it is that you're trying to make.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I guess my little tagline I made for the picture is from this world to the next, which, you know, implies, you know, there's something next, something new to be, that I am trying to construct. But the way that I'm going about doing this, it's very reflexive. It's more of the sense that, okay, and I've mentioned this a little bit in, you know, previous answers, but there are all these invisible processes which we are not, you know, immediately conscious of, that we make use of in cognition to, you know, build the world around us, you know, make sense of our place in history, make sense of our place in time. And what I'm aiming to do is to draw attention to these mechanisms that, you know, account for, you know, our own understanding of ourself and, you know, the world proper in the most general sense.
Right.
You know? And also, you know, I find a great parallel in the way cinema works and the way that we do this cognitively. In doing this, in drawing attention to all of these, you know, things that usually go under the radar, or which necessarily must happen, you know, kind of in the background, I hope to create, you know, a new world in that we're now one step removed.
But if you find something, you never. Maybe you also find something like that.
Turning it back to, you mentioned rationalism earlier. Descartes is a big influence for me in terms of making this film. Just in the sense of, you know, we need to begin thinking, we need to strip away all of our assumptions about the world, you know, and then rationally build them from scratch, you know, and then from there we sort of are occupying a new world. Like we're not just existing in the world. We are now in a new world of our own making, and this process repeats, you know, forever. Hopefully, hopefully humanity, we keep doing this. We keep learning more. And everything new that we learn, I feel like is another step back, another new world. We keep going and going and going.
Right. Yeah. You're always refining and rebuilding systems of approaching reality and perception.
Yes. Exactly.
And it doesn't stop.
Yes.
I don't think it can stop.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully not. All right. I think that's it. I think we're good.
I think we're good.
All right.
All right. Well.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. This beautiful day in East River Park.
Yeah.